Hello, my name is Bermet Talant. I'm a reporter here at the Kyiv Post, and this is our weekly podcast with highlights from August 11 edition. Today, we will tell you about the man who saved Ukraine 23 billion hryvnias by fighting corruption in public procurement. We got to the city of Zolochiv in Lviv Oblast to find out how decentralization is going in Ukraine. We also have a dispatch from the war front where Ukrainian army defends a town of Luhanske. We all have been to, or at least know, Lviv and Ternopil, two main cities in western Ukraine. But I bet very few of you have heard of Zolochiv. It's a small town located between Lviv and Ternopil and a 2-hour drive from the Polish border. Zolochiv badly needs new investors to become independent from the subsidies of the government, which often come with political strings attached. The author of the story, Oksana Grisenko, who went to Zolochiv, is here with me. Hello, Oksana.
Hello.
What is Zolochiv like?
It is a nice little town, quite small, just 24,000 people. But its historic center is very pretty because quite recently the municipal authorities made a renovation of the historic sidewalks and cobblestones. That's why it's now very nice, and it's close for driving, so it's a pedestrian area. Basically, I liked it, and this town basically has a spirit of old Europe. There are many houses built in times of Austro-Hungarian Empire, and you can still go inside and see these windows, the staircases, very old.
How come isn't it a popular tourist spot like Lviv, for example?
It is basically on the way of tourists because Zolochiv has a famous castle. But at the same time, the tourists usually just come and visit the castle and then leave the city. They don't stay there. And this is one of ideas of the local mayor and other municipal authorities. They want to attract tourists to Zolochiv and make them stay there at least for a night or two and enjoy not only a castle, but the historic city center.
And what are the issues they're facing that force them to seek more revenues to the local budget?
The problem for the city is that the government, both state government and the oblast government, they are sending less and less subsidies to the local communities because we are having a decentralization reform, and that's the idea to make the local communities more self-sufficient, but at the same time to get more responsibilities. That's why the city needs actually to have more investments and companies to get more money from the city taxes. But the problem is the locals often prefer to go and seek work in Poland, which is quite close to the city, and there are not many businesses in this area. The biggest plant which I visited, it is Elektrokontakt, Ukraine. It is a branch of a German company, and it gives job to more than 1,000 local people. But it's still far not enough. That's why the authorities are looking for investment from Ukraine or abroad.
And what kind of businesses they're looking for?
Basically, they are ready to accept any business, and the mayor told us that he has 2 land plots close to the highway and to the railway road with a good connection, and he offers them for investors to come and build the plants there.
Ukraine's government is touting its decentralization, which grants more powers and responsibilities to local authorities. How is Zolochiv setting an example for other towns?
Basically, the mayor of Zolochiv told me that they are not hurrying up to organize the merged community, which is a part of decentralization reform, because he says they will get a bit more money in the city budget thanks to the local taxes, but at the same time they will get much more responsibilities and expenses because they will have to totally cover the local hospitals and schools, and this is lots of money, so they will be in debts, and that's why they're fearing of the decentralization, and they're still not participating in this totally.
And the last question is, what do you recommend to see in Zolochiv to those who decide to visit it?
I would say the most interesting thing I saw there was a local cemetery. Maybe it sounds odd, but still, this place shows greatly the history of this town, because there are the tombstones of very different nations, Polish, Ukrainians. There are soldiers, both Polish, Ukrainian and Soviet. There are even German prisoners of war being buried there. So if you walk through this quiet place and you see these tombstones, you can just grasp the very tragic history of this place, but very rich history. And I would also recommend, of course, to visit the city center, then also go to castle, which is still interesting, and maybe also visit the place where there was the old Jewish cemetery, but now they're just a kind of park and some monument which shows that there were a big population of Jewish people living there, but it's almost totally extinct. And there are also several very nice churches.
That's fascinating. Thank you, Oksana.
Thank you.
And we're moving on from the west to the east of Ukraine. As Russia's war drags into its fourth summer, the defensive lines on both sides of the front are hardening. With no end of the war in sight, the trenches and dugouts are becoming more elaborate and formidable. Near Russian-controlled Debaltseve, a city in Donetsk Oblast some 700 kilometers southeast of Kyiv, the soldiers of Ukrainian army are protecting the town of Luhanske. Our defense reporter, Will Ponomarenko, came from the war zone. Welcome back to Kyiv, Will.
Hi there.
So first of all, Luhanske should not be confused with the city of Luhansk, right?
Yeah, that's right. It may sound weird, but Luhanske is a small town in the Debaltseve area. It's all because of river Luhanka, which next goes to Luhansk Oblast and then to the city of Luhansk, which is now occupied by Russian troops. So yes, it's all because of the river.
So what does the area look like, just to give our listeners an idea, and how far are the Russian-led forces from that place?
Well, imagine wilderness devastated by war. That used to be a thriving region, an industrial hub and transport hub. Now it's devastated and battered by war and also by poverty. 2.5 years ago there was a huge battle, the Battle of Debaltseve, that ended up with disaster for the Ukrainian army, And since then the whole region has never recovered from the consequences. So imagine flat steppe, it's open terrain, and in this flat steppe there are some sparse woods. Both troops try to cover each other from enemy fire. So Ukrainian troops, they defend just south of Luhansk, and they stand approximately between 300 and 600 meters away from the enemy lines. In all, we can say that now Ukrainian troops control territory up to 10 kilometers to the city of Debaltseve itself. I would say if it comes to about another frontline zones, they stand far enough from each other, so the fighting is not so intense.
Was there heavy fighting in that area when you were there?
On that day that we've been there, we were lucky to avoid fighting. We are lucky to avoid it, but there was a huge fighting the night before during the thunderstorm, and when we got out of there, I received the message that the next day there was a 2-hour fighting. Fighting usually starts there after dusk, in the dead of night, so since we are present here in daylight, so we rarely see the real fighting.
You stayed with Ukrainian soldiers. Do they expect possible escalation in fall? How do they prepare?
Well, yeah, we stay there for a while, and I've never seen any exact expectations. For instance, in this autumn we expect the escalation. But anyway, since they are situated in the open terrain, in the flat steppe, the very logic of the stalemate war, of the trench warfare, makes them to build more trenches, to fortify as much as they can, because enemy will not deliberate to use their mistakes and use their weaknesses. And they're ready for any scenario in the nearest future. So I would say the basic line is do your job and be ready.
Thank you, Will. Max Nefyodov might be the most admired public official in Ukraine at the moment. The 33-year-old first deputy economy minister and former investment banker is credited as a leader in launching the Prozoro. Prozoro is a public procurement platform that has made government purchases more transparent and saved taxpayers $894 million. Or 23 billion hryvnias so far. Olga Rudenko, the Kyiv Post editor, met with Max Nefyodov. Thanks for joining us, Olga.
Thank you for having me.
So who is Max Nefyodov and why is he a superstar?
Well, the superstar thing is an interesting way to put it. Max Nefyodov is the first deputy economy minister, and he's been in the job for 2.5 years, which is itself very interesting because he was one of the reformers who came from business, and most of the people he came with in 2014, they were forced out or they quit, and they all cited corruption and pressure. But he stayed, and apparently he's been very successful in his job.
And how has Prozoro, the platform that he launched, transformed the procurement system in Ukraine?
So before Prozoro existed, we had a procurement system where you didn't have many options to actually watch the process, and you couldn't see who the bidders were, and it was very limiting for journalists and for public activists to control, and it offered a lot of ways to scheme, to collude, and so on. So Prozoro was one of the first and the biggest things that appeared after the Euromaidan revolution in 2014. It's a very modern platform that allows you, wherever you are, it allows you to watch the whole process of a state agency procuring anything from A to Z. And you can look at the company, you can look at the tender offers, you can see if it's fair. To put it simply, it's very, very transparent. Because they have this bidding process, they're saving a lot of money. So now they report they have saved 23 billion hryvnias. And when I say saved, it means that 23 billion has been the difference between what state agencies were ready to pay for certain services or goods and what they actually paid, thanks to the bidding that put down the price. So yeah, 23 billion in 2 years, it's a pretty impressive number.
That is very impressive. And as you mentioned before, many reformers who came to the government after Euromaidan have left, but Nefyodov is still there. Why did he stay?
Yeah, this is one of the questions that I wanted to answer when I was writing this story. It's really interesting that he stays because he works in the economy ministry, which oversees a lot of things like privatization and state-owned enterprises, which have historically been open for corruption, shall I say. And given that many of the reformers who entered the government in 2014 have since left, citing corruption and political pressure, including one of them was Aivaras Abramovičius, who was the boss of Nefyodov, who left in early 2016. It is hard to believe, indeed, that he doesn't witness any corruption, given that he's the first deputy economy minister. I mean, we can think that there is no corruption at all in the ministry, which is, I would say, a bit far-fetched. Or we can say that maybe he is just focusing on this small area of his work, which is mainly Prozoro and public procurement. And I believe that he's doing a good job in that. I believe the reason he stays is that he's been able to focus on this small area and, well, maybe not ask too many questions.
Has your opinion changed of him after you interviewed him? Do you think that he might be staying because he's kind of loyal to President Poroshenko?
Well, he's been very, very careful during the interview. He, as I say in the story, he almost never complains. He doesn't say this person in the government is ineffective, this department is obstructing my work. He only mentions names when he's speaking about how grateful he is to these people. He's never criticizing anyone directly. Ever since we had this interview last week, I've been thinking that there are two ways to look at Nefyodov and his role in the government. If he indeed is preferring to not see some corruption happening around him for the sake of staying in his job and being able to bring change to reform public procurement, one might say that this is the right thing to do because if you get out of the system, then nothing's going to change, right? But another way to see it is that if you stay in there and try to do something good, you're still sort of legitimizing it by your presence. And so I've been thinking about these two ways to look at it. Honestly, I don't have the answer. Is it right to stay in the system, or should he leave and say, I don't want anything to do with that. But then we wouldn't have Prozor probably.
Thanks for joining us, Olga.
Thank you for having me.
This is it for today. To read more of the stories discussed on this podcast, visit KyievPost.com or pick up a copy of our latest issue. And if you like our work, please subscribe at KyievPost.com/subscription. Почуємось!